When it came to going to Brazil at the end of 2006 for Kimi's last race as a McLaren driver, I'd already ticked off an official verbal warning and an official written warning, together with numerous unofficial varieties too. But there was no way I was going to let him get away without at least the threat of a traditional send-off. What's up, everybody? Today I thought I would expand on one of the stories that is here in my book that I know many of you that have read it have really enjoyed. Those that haven't might find it really interesting. And if you want to know more, of course, you can go and buy the book. But it was the day that I dyed Kimi's hands blue. So I thought I'd read you a little extract from the book and expand on a couple of details on it and tell you a bit more about the context behind the day. And hopefully you'll find it interesting. Because I'm up in the treehouse, I thought we'd call this segment Tales from the Treehouse. Now, there's been a long-running tradition at McLaren that whenever somebody leaves, no matter who you are, whether you're a mechanic, an engineer, a truck driver, it doesn't matter who you are, when you leave McLaren, when you retire or when you leave to go and work somewhere else, you get the treatment on your last race, your last day at the circuit. And that treatment invariably involved dyeing people blue. We had this really intense deep blue dye in powder form that we'd pop into the coolant system within the engine to dye the water a deep blue colour. It makes it very easy to spot if you get a leak on the car. So that's why we did it. But this stuff was so powerful, so intense that maybe even a small thimbleful would be enough to dye a swimming pool a deep blue colour. It's serious stuff. So if you sprinkle that onto somebody and then chuck some water at them, well, they immediately turn like a Smurf. And there are numerous examples of that happening over the years. I've got some incredible memories and some good pictures of people that have been completely turned blue. And, you know, it can last for days. If you don't wash it off quickly, it can last for days. There's a mate of mine who left and we dyed him blue. He was a bald-headed guy. His entire head went blue. And 2 weeks after he'd left McLaren, he went to the doctor for a hearing checkup. And the doctor was looking in his ear with the little thing that they look in there, and was very confused when the doctor said, "Sorry, sir, is there any reason? I can't understand it, but your eardrums, the inside of your eardrums are a bright blue colour." and that was the reason. He had to sort of shyly try and explain the situation. So that was the tradition. Everybody did it. Nobody got away with it unless you were clever enough, like me, to not tell people that you were leaving until after the last race of the season. Do it in the off-season. I could never understand why people would announce they were leaving, that was going to be their last race, because, I mean, you've got to go through this torturous process. Anyway, that's what happened. So when Kimi decided he was leaving, yeah, there was no way I was going to let him get away with it, because by that point we'd built up a really great relationship. We were great friends. We socialised away from the track as well as working together. We'd had some incredible moments partying together. We were just great buddies, and we wound each other up constantly anyway. So this seemed like a perfect opportunity. So, you know, when it came to that last week, when he was leaving for Ferrari, I thought, okay, I'm going to dye him blue. And then when I first said it, I didn't really mean it. I just thought I'd wind him up. There's no way I was actually going to, dye our driver blue. I mean, you get sacked for that sort of thing. But I just kept winding him up all week. So when he arrived at the circuit in Sao Paulo in that final week, I said to him, "You know that whenever someone leaves McLaren, they get dyed blue, don't you, mate?" I said darkly. Kimi looked nervous and tried hard to mask his growing uneasiness. "You won't get me," he said. "I get helicopter straight after the race." I just smiled at him. "We'll see," I warned in a falsely confident fashion. I had no doubt Kimi would actually be jumping into a chopper as soon as he'd finished with those pesky media commitments, and there were no real plans for actually carrying out my threats. It was purely designed to worry him a bit. But as the week went on, I continued my jabs. Kimi continued to bat them away in his uniquely nonchalant manner, but it was getting to him, and by race day no words were even necessary. Just the subtlest of looks and a wry smile across the garage at him was enough to receive the middle finger back. And he definitely did bite. You know, Kimi was the sort of character that at first he wouldn't even raise an eyebrow at little jabs like that, but over the week it began to get to him, and I could tell he was starting to get a little bit riled by it. And at that point, I thought, I've gone a bit far with this. I can't take my threats to this level that I'm now taking them to. Obviously, tugging on his strings and then not go through with it. So stupidly, I decided that I would actually dye him blue. Now, I was never going to get the chance after the race, like we would do with a mechanic or a truckie or whatever, to dye them fully blue. So I hatched a plan that was stupid, it was ridiculous, it was immature, but it was brilliant. My foolproof plan was this. On the grid, once Kimi had stepped away from the car to chat to his engineer or go to the toilet, I'd sprinkle some of the infamous blue powder into his race gloves. Kimi would then drive for 2 hours, his palms sweating in the Sao Paulo heat, and at the end of the Grand Prix, he'd remove his gloves to find his hands had turned an alarming shade of blue. Now, I know what you're thinking. What an idiot. Yeah, I know, totally. It was an idiotic thing to even suggest, let alone carry out. But carry it out I did. So when Kimi was doing that now infamous interview with Martin Brundle on the grid, do you remember when he didn't turn up for the Pele photo shoot, I think it was? And Kimi and Martin Brundle had asked Kimi why he wasn't there. And Kimi's response, which is now quite famous, he said, "I was taking a shit." And he was taking a shit, to be fair, that was the truth. But whilst he was doing all of that, I was sprinkling this blue powder inside his gloves. I then, duly, with a straight face, as I normally would, I gave him his gloves after I'd strapped him into the car. I watched him put them on. I wished him luck. And I'll be totally honest, I was absolutely shit myself. If he'd spotted there was some blue dye in his gloves, I mean, goodness me, not only would it have been a disaster for my plan, but I mean, it could have ruined his race. He would have been all over the place, not knowing what else I'd done. He'd been having to find a new pair of gloves, and he was very particular about his gloves as well. I had checked that he wasn't allergic to this stuff, by the way, so I knew there wasn't going to be that kind of reaction. But anyway, I went ahead with it. He put his gloves on, I sent him on his way, and I went back to the pits, and I watched the race unfolding, realising what an idiot I'd just been, thinking that maybe this would be the last time I would ever work as a race mechanic at McLaren, given what a stupid thing I'd just done. Kimi was running around in the race at Brazil. He was 4th at the time, and I was desperately hoping that he would get 3rd, so he'd be on the podium, having pulled his gloves off, waving to the crowd with his now bright blue hands. In the end, he only came 4th. Maybe that was a good thing. But immediately after he came out of the race, he came straight back to the McLaren garage. He came straight in, but because he was leaving McLaren, because it was his last race, he was off to Ferrari, he came straight in. He shook Ron Dennis's hand. He went straight up to him to congratulate him. Ron got blue hands. Ron's wife shook his hand. She got blue hands. Norbert Haug, the head of Mercedes, and his wife all shook Kimi's hands and had blue, traces of blue, all over all of the biggest bosses in the team. You can imagine, can't you, what I was thinking. I was dying in a corner. I heard Ron Dennis on the other side of our kind of banner system saying, right, whoever's just done this has lost their job. And I honestly thought I had. So I panicked. I was terrified. I realised what a huge mistake I'd made. And then Kimi came back into the garage. Kimi walked into the front of the garage. He was furiously wiping his bright blue palms with wipes. Then he looked over directly at me and pointed. "You fucking bastard. I get you back." Now, that was a great reaction for me. When Kimi said that, there was a huge sense of relief in that at least he didn't hate me. I mean, that was fine because he said that sort of thing all the time. And I knew he probably would try and get me back. And those who have read the book, and I won't go into it now, those who have read the book will know he definitely did get me back in a pretty serious way. So if you want to know that story, buy this thing. But the fact that he wasn't, really angry in a serious way made me feel a lot better. But I still had this huge worry about losing my job. And, I spent the rest of the evening terrified, trying to keep my head down. I actually went to the post-race party that year in Brazil, which is a huge Red Bull party where everybody was. And by this point, the story had got out all over the pit lane. But I had people coming up to me. I had other team bosses from other teams. Flavio Briatore at Renault. I had other people coming up to me going, "Do you know what? That was brilliant." And the fact that you've got Ron's hands blue, he said, people were coming, "If you need a job, just come and knock on my door." He said, "I'll give you a job tomorrow." So by the end of the post-race party, where I got absolutely hammered, as everybody did, I think I'd had 3 or 4 job offers. I mean, as it turned out in the end, I didn't need the job offers because another story that's in here, which is quite interesting as well, meant that I had a kind of get out of jail free card tucked away secretly in my back pocket at McLaren. Don't worry, I didn't have photos of anybody in particular, but I did have Martin Whitmarsh, who was one of the big dogs at the team at the time, in my back pocket, and I was able to use that card in a master stroke when I really needed it as a get out of jail free, and I managed to keep my job. I got the final warning that was on the McLaren HR hierarchy, if you like, so I had every warning there was going, but managed to keep my job. And I have to say that in the end, when the whole thing blew over, I went into a really serious meeting to find out if I'd lost my job with Dave Ryan, the team manager. And his closing words after delivering this really serious monologue about how I'd let the team down, I'd let him down, I'd let myself down, I'd let my teammates down, how serious it really was. When the HR person had left the room, Dave Ryan turned around to me and said, "Look, Elvis," he said, "I know what I've just said." He said, "It is serious, don't do this again." He said, "But in all truth," he said, "I had a final written warning when I was a mechanic." He said, "Ron's had a final written warning as well when he was a young lad." He said, "So it doesn't turn out bad for everybody." So there you go. So it was a terrible idea. It was well executed, and the results were absolutely brilliant because Kimi's hands were like Papa Smurf when he took his gloves off. And I have huge regrets about the whole thing, but my only real regret in that moment was that he wasn't able to be up on the podium waving to everybody with his bright blue hands. But as I said earlier, maybe that was a good thing. So there you go. Tales from the Treehouse today, expanding on the day that I dyed Kimi Raikkonen's hands blue. He then went on to get me back he escalated. Let's say that. He escalated the story to a point where it came to an end. Because when he got me back, I don't think I could go up many more levels than that. So it came to an abrupt end. And if you want to know that, go check out The Mechanic by me, available on Amazon and all good bookstores. Links in the description. But for now, that is episode 1 of Tales in the Treehouse. See you soon. Ta-da.